Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, which is going to be for The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. This is the fourth book in the Mistborn Wax and Wane series, otherwise known as Mistborn Era 2. I've been waiting on this one for quite a while. Some of you may know that this book came out a couple of years ago, and I read the other three Era 2 books. Spring and summer of 2023, I believe, is around when I read these. And so I decided to wait to read The Lost Metal, first of all, after I had caught up on the rest of the Cosmere, but I was pretty much caught up by the beginning of this year. And the reason I waited so long is because my other Era 2 books were all in mass market paperback, and I wanted them all to match. And so I decided I was okay with waiting a little longer for this book to come out in mass market paperback. Came out in that format in September, and so I got it. Kind of a silly reason, I think, maybe, to wait so long, but I didn't mind waiting for it. And so I was very excited to read this one. I really enjoyed the first three books in Era 2. Shadows of Self was a real standout for me, and even though now that I've read Era 1 again, I wouldn't say it's in contention for like my favorite Mistborn book like I would have when I first read it, but it is still a fantastic book and one of my personal favorites in the Cosmere. And the other two, Alloy of Law and Bands of Mourning, were very good as well. And so I was really looking forward to The Lost Metal. I'd heard a lot of good things about it. I had heard Sanderson say that it was very Cosmere inclusive, lots of like tie-ins to the wider Cosmere, which had me very excited and everything. And I heard it was this big epic conclusion, so I was really looking forward to it. And so I picked it up and I read it. And it's hard for me to kind of be okay with letting this overtake Shadows of Self, because I loved Shadows of Self. But this may very well be my favorite book in Era 2, which not only would put it at the top of Era 2, obviously, but also put it on par with all of Era 1. I really loved this book a lot. I had a fantastic time with it. So, to get started talking about some good things with this book, of which there are many things, first of all, I really enjoyed just the storyline here. This was, I think, Shadows of Self also was like this, I think, but this was one of the first times in Era 2 where I felt like the plot really drew me in. Which basically what's going on here is you have this enemy faction, the Set, who are doing some stuff that is not particularly great, and you have Wax, who is kind of the main character, kind of detective-like character, as well as his partner Wayne and the other characters in the series, who are trying to figure out what they're up to, and it turns out that they have some weapons that they have access to and are potentially planning a pretty major attack on Elendel, which is kind of the capital. And obviously that's not very good, and so they decide that they're going to go and try to stop them and everything. And it's an interesting plot. There's some fun twists and turns to it that I enjoyed. There's no like major reveals or anything like there would be in some of the other Cosmere books, even in some of the Era 2 books. There's a couple like reveals here and there, but they're nothing like huge. But it's really fun. It's a fun plot. It's very adventurous feeling. It's like, I kind of think of Mistborn Era 1 being the very like epic fantasy, not quite in the same way as like Stormlight Archive, but kind of that really like epic fantasy feel. Like the first one is kind of like an epic fantasy take on a heist. The second one's kind of Game of Thronesy almost, where it's got like the political intrigue, and then 3 is just really big and epic. And then Era 2 is much more small scale, much more kind of fun and adventurous. And I think this book kind of combines those two kind of tones, where it has a very fun and adventurous feel of the rest of Era 2, but on a larger scale. So I really enjoyed that about it. I think it was very fitting for the conclusion to Era 2 to kind of go that way. Also really enjoyed the characters here. I wouldn't say like the character arcs throughout this book, except for maybe with Wayne, who is the absolute standout character of this book to me. The character arcs throughout the book were not like super compelling to me. However, I really enjoyed the characters themselves. I love the interactions between them. And as I just said, Wayne is the absolute standout character in this book for me. I always enjoyed him. He certainly has a unique sense of humor that's definitely not going to work for everyone. There were times where I thought maybe it went a little much, but I do enjoy his humor. And he is the absolute standout character in this book for me. I really, really enjoyed him. and the way his arc goes in this book, I think, was super satisfying and very well done. And I just enjoyed a lot of the interactions between all the different characters and things like that. I remember before the book came out, Sanderson said because there was such a big gap between books 3 and 4, he had been saving a whole lot of Wayne quotes that he could use in The Lost Metal, and I definitely got that impression reading this, because there was a lot of, I think, very quotable lines by Wayne in this book. And to go back to another thing that Brandon said before this book came out, he mentioned that this book was going to be very interconnected with the wider Cosmere. I think it's done in a way that you don't need to have read everything else in order to get it, but you definitely do get the strong impression that there's a lot out there beyond just this series. But I think it works pretty well. It's a lot of fun as a fan to see all of that stuff, especially now having read everything else. And of course, at the time this book came out, there was a lot of other stuff out before this. And so as a fan, it was super cool. And I think, again, if you haven't read all the other stuff, I think you can kind of get past it. Things are explained well enough that I think you can understand it. But I can understand why it would feel a little overwhelming for some people. And one last big positive for me that I have to mention is the action in this book. There are some fantastic action scenes. I think the way Mistborn is in general, both in terms of like melee combat and then now into like gun combat with this series, as well as just the magic system of Mistborn in general, makes for really excellent action. And there are some great action scenes in this book. There's a big action scene between Wax, Wayne, and 2 other combatants towards the end of this book. Those who have read it will know what I'm talking about, that I just loved. And there's just a lot of good action in this book. It's super well done. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. As far as more negative points with this book, I only really have 2 things to mention, and they're both minor things, I think. The first is that it did take some time for this book to really get going for me. I would say the book, I think, is split into like 4 parts or something like that, and it took until or maybe 3, I can't remember. But it took me until the end of part 1 to really get invested in this book, which granted is about a quarter of the book. But you know, it was enjoyable still. I still enjoyed reading it, but it just took some time for me to get really on board and really excited about it. But at that point, I was completely into it, and from then on, I just had an absolute blast reading this book. I flew through this book. It reads very quickly, especially if you're enjoying it as much as I was. And so the fact that it took a little bit for me to really get into it was not a big issue, because it still read very quickly, and I still enjoyed the opening to this book. It just took some time for me to really get into it. And the only other major thing that I can think of in terms of negatives is the Cosmere interconnectiveness. As I said, I think it's fine. Like, if you are not super aware of it, I think it works fine. And as a fan, it's super fun and rewarding. But I do think this is the first book where it was really interconnected. And there are some strong interconnected bits with the rest of the Cosmere that are parts of like the main plot, major character interactions, things like that. And there were some interconnected Cosmere stuff in past books as well, like in the Stormlight Archive. But I think that was much less, I don't want to say obvious because that's not really accurate, but it's like much less like, oh, this is clearly stuff from outside of this world that is coming in now and becoming involved and things like that. And I think that for the first time that this was really happening in the Cosmere, I think it may have been a little bit too much. I think he maybe could have cut back on some of the wider Cosmere stuff in this book just a little bit. I think, again, just because this is the first book that really did that, I think it might have just been a little too much for the first time of really diving into the Cosmere connections. I don't know. I just thought it maybe was a little much, but it was still fun. It was still enjoyable. I still think you can read this and enjoy it, even if you have not read the other stuff, or are not aware of it or whatever. But I do just think it was a little much. But that pretty much wraps up everything I have to say about this book. Overall, I had a blast with this book. I thought it was super fun. I just loved the adventure feel of it. And it read super quick. I had a great time with it. I blasted right through it in no time. And very emotionally fulfilling too in the ending. I think that the book ended in a way that was very satisfying and very emotional and things like that. It's just all across the board, I think, done very well. And I had a great time reading this. And again, Probably my favorite Era 2 book, which puts it among my favorite Mistborn books and my favorite Cosmere books in general. Had a great time with this one. Absolutely loved it. So as far as a rating out of 10 that I would give The Lost Metal, I'd give it a 9.5 out of 10. Again, just loved my time with this one and really, really enjoyed it. Definitely one of my favorite books, I think, that I have read this year. I just really loved it a lot. So that pretty much wraps up all my thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this book if you have read it, if it is also your favorite book in Era 2, if it's maybe your least favorite in Era 2, if it's somewhere in the middle, and how you think it compares to the other Mistborn books or the other Cosmere books as well, if it happens to land among your favorites or least favorites there. Let me know in the comments as well. So that's pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.